Now, this has been a COVID time project, the baptism project. We started meeting just at the beginning of COVID and all the lockdowns. So all meetings have been online so far, but the possibility of webinars instead of in situ meetings did increase the participation considerably. And I'm happy to report that there are more than 200 people registered last time I checked to participate in the 5 webinars that we have hosted that we plan to host this spring. So this is truly a good opportunity for people all over the Nordic countries to join in and discuss baptism. The webinars are planned by a Nordic committee, which is looking at baptism in times of change, collecting, categorizing, and introducing material that has been produced in the Nordic countries, such as research, reports, and actions. And the group is led by Professor Harald Hegstad from Norway. And from Sweden, we have Karin Tillberg, from Finland, Jiri Komulainen, and myself from Iceland, and from Denmark, Jonas Jørgensen, who is also both our tax report at these meetings and a co-host today. Today, we will have contributions from Norway, from Denmark, and Finland. And then we have discussions in breakout groups for 20 minutes, and finally, a plenary discussion. Now, the title today is Why Should I Baptize My Child? Qualitative Perspectives on New Patterns in Infant Baptism. So while we looked at numbers last time, this time we're going to focus on the people behind the numbers, their reasons to opt for baptism or not. And I'm now going to give the mic to Jonas Jørgensen to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you very much. I'm also very excited about this, our second webinar in the series on changes in baptism in the Nordic region. The thing is that since the 70s, a growing literature has emerged on Christianity from a social, scientific, and empirical theological perspective in the Nordic region. Somewhat oversimplified, one might say that classical theology studies the content of Christian faith and tradition. And the data for that is almost exclusively written text. In contrast, and equally oversimplified, you could say, the social, scientific, and empirical theological studies focus on Christians. And the data is generated from questionnaires, from participant observation, and from interviews. This means that the social, scientific, and empirical theological perspective offer a rich source for understanding how contemporary social and cultural processes shape and affect baptismal practice and baptismal understanding in our Nordic region. And these social and cultural processes are, of course, an important part of our attempt to map what has been going on in baptism in the last 2 decades in our common or joint Nordic project. In a number of studies, the social science and empirical theology on baptism has pointed out which positive and which negative factors we see in parents' choice for baptism. The theoretical discussions have centered on how secularization and individualization affect religious belongings, and how changing religious traditions play a role in the changing patterns of baptism. And I personally look forward to learning more about this from our 2 presenters this afternoon, who have both been towering figures in our Nordic region in the social, scientific, and empirical study of baptism. I also look forward to the response from our 3rd presenter, the Hanna Salomäki from Finland, who's also contributed in this area. So with that, I will give the word back to you, Steinar. Thank you.
Thank you. And our first presenter today is from Norway. That is Ida Marie Hø, professor in sociology of religion, and from the University of Agder. And I'm truly excited to hear what she has to say. So Ida Marie, please.
Thank you very much, Steinar. and thanks to Halvard Hegstad, who have invited me to present, and also to the organizing committee for baptism in the times of change. I will now try to share my screen with you. It works? Good.
Ida-Marie, could you
Yes.
put on the slideshow? What we are now seeing is always the next slide, which makes them smaller. Is it possible to change that view?
Do you mean like this?
No, I'm lacking the technical know-how now, Jonas.
Yes, I think you should proceed with this, Ida-Marie. Yes.
Oh, okay, it works.
Yes.
Thank you. This paper deals with the schism in European history of religion. In a globalized and rapidly changing society that reflects increasing individualization and consumerism, the Protestant mainline churches and Catholic churches are experiencing a decline in infant baptism. Three important changes stand out in this context. First, the way in which parents relate to the church are changing, which has resulted in a crisis of transmission from one generation to the next. An emulating perspective to use when examining these changes is to scrutinize the generational effect on parents in the religious and worldview upbringing of their children. Second, consumption and consumer society have altered transmission of tradition and the traditional way of belonging, with consequences for the practice of infant baptism. Third, the changes in the view of parenting and the parents' respect for their child's voice. Who are the parents who do not want to baptize their children? The data from the survey conducted in Norway showing that the group of parents choosing to not baptize their children represent in many ways the new Norwegian society, the urban and religiously diverse Norway. This group of parents live in areas with the greatest migration, also Oslo, Central Eastern Norway, and other large cities. They have higher education, and many have friends with different belief or worldview than themselves. Almost half have a spouse who is a member of a religious community other than the Church of Norway, or who has no affiliation. These parents have a loose relationship to the church. They put less emphasis on the importance of religion in their lives. They are passive and distant church members. Moreover, they are more critical to the church than the parents who choose to baptize their children. In particular, they are critical to the church's handling of homosexuality. As we have seen in the last webinar, the results from Norway are in several respects in line with the results from the other Nordic Lutheran churches. The other reference I have to this theme is qualitative data I conduct among parental couples who have opted out of infant baptism and rather chosen naming ritual. This group of parents were born between 1964 and 1971, who are part of what is referred to as Generation X. Characteristics of this group of 20 parents are that they all except one are baptized in the Church of Norway, and 9 were still affiliated. Among the parents who have opted for a naming ritual, there is a prevalent attitude that baptism is for parents who are unique when it comes to religious faith. For those who are not considering themselves as Christian, the parents advocate a liberal ideal of individual freedom and autonomy. The person is at her best when she is self-determined and autonomous. The point of reference is the self. Authenticity stands therefore out as an idol. Instead of choosing baptism on behalf of the child, they want the child to make such an important choice on his or her own. The parents are of the opinion that the individual is self-reflective and has opportunities to create his or her relatively or own philosophical or religious identity. It is considered negative to follow the tide without taking a position, but it's positive to consider what is right for oneself. Among parents, there is a widespread notion that the conditions for reflection are better for children who are not baptized than for children who are baptized. The parents express that their children have a freer position and are therefore better prepared to reflect on baptism. There is also the perception that young people are old enough to choose for themselves. They can make an independent choice whether or not they want to be confirmed and whatever kind of confirmation they want to have. If they want a Christian confirmation, they are also equipped with the ability to choose to be baptized before being confirmed. Socialization studies try to understand whether and how religion has become embedded in several domains of our modern lives. It seems that decline in institutional religiosity and religious practices in most European countries since the 1960s is linked more to the influences of the individual's childhood than for the loss of religion over one's lifetime. Being religious is very largely a matter of early socialization. A large body of research provides evidence that the children's family backgrounds, where family members implicitly or explicitly socialize their children to a religious or a non-religious worldview, have consequences. The children's family background has consequences for becoming of age children when it comes to deciding whether to leave or to stay within religion. Therefore, when studying the nature of religious socialization, one has to focus on the early development environment. But this is not the only factor. It is also important to look at the parents' generation. Their values, religious practices, and beliefs reflect broader cohort trends. This may also mean that there is a generational effect on parents in their religious and worldview upbringing of their children. The children are influenced by their family, and both generations, parents and child, are influenced by the socio-cultural environments they have grown up in. Linking the child to the family draws on the theory of generations outlined by the sociologist Carl Mannheim back in the 1950s. The sociological phenomenon of generations is ultimately based on the biological rhythm of birth and death and the sociological relevance of these biological factors. The basic principle for the generational approach is that every child is a child of his or her time. This means that the unity of a generation is bound together in certain ways. Apart from the different physical and mental aging, individuals are deep-seated in a historical social process. This implies that individuals are in a position to be involved in the same historical and social circumstances, and especially that the experiences of the same events impinge upon a similar consciousness. Consequently, transferring faith to the next generation focuses on the young people and parents and what characterizes them compared to younger generation or older generations. Past investigations that have been found relevant argue, as Robert Whitnow has said, that generations that came of age before 1960s are quite different from those that came of age during and after the 1960s. This is also relevant in the context of the Nordic societies. Therefore, it's meaningful to take a closer look at what distinguishes the generation to understand their approach to religious and worldviews, and particularly infant baptism. In the 1980s, politics took a turn in the right in Norway as in many other Western countries. Right-wing politics came to the fore, and the country had a prime minister leading a conservative government up until 1986. The decade represented a liberalization of the Norwegian economy. The mixed economy and the regulation of the credit market were rolled back. Tax reforms marked the transition from a post-war social democratic tax regime to a market-oriented tax model. The influence of the market that encouraged people to make individual choices and follow their preferences did not only refer to economy. A massive turn to subjective life refers to consumption and subjectivation of worldviews. Religious communities, which are characterized by their connection to the collective, were challenged by what was offered on the secular religious buffet table. Growth in the number of options due to supply and demand impact religion on both the organizational and individual level. Religious consumers and the development of church communities as religious suppliers changed the traditional role of religion. Religions have become not only a question of belonging, but also a question of choosing leisure times activities. Individuals' conscious or unconscious choices related to religion had to compete with other options. In Norway, Sunday had already in 1960s lost their binding form that secured religious practice when sports events started to compete with the Sunday services. Children, particularly those living in urban areas, had experienced secular hobbies and free time activity for a long time. On the other hand, the Church of Norway was not a passive partner. As Peter Berger has discussed, the Christian communities had to differentiate their various products and niches in order to survive. Influenced by the parallel market of religious and secular alternatives, parents and children got worldview options in terms of school subjects and rites of passage. In 1989, parents were given the opportunity to choose to have their children taking the worldview school subject as an alternative to learning about Christianity. In the 1980s, the Norwegian Humanist Association also launched naming ritual as an offer for their members and parents who did not prefer baptism. According to the Norwegian Humanist Association, the aim of the naming ritual is to provide equality-conscious customers in Norway a humanistic offer for making the transition that in form and content reflects people's lives and thinking. The humanistic naming ritual has never been a strong competitor to infant baptism as humanistic confirmation has been to Christian confirmation. Private birth and naming rituals tend to be stronger options to infant baptism. In the 1990s, Norway experienced even more extensive economic change. Oil and aquaculture made Norway richer, and the gap between rich and poor increased. Set against the backdrop of wider social changes, this materialistic turn influenced Norwegian attitudes. Value surveys show that Norwegians were more concerned about money and wealth. These emerging socioeconomic changes in the 1990s did not influence the tradition of infant baptism that much. Rather, the religious secular market reduced Christian confirmation and reduced Christian marriage, and the secular alternatives flourished. Among both cohabiting couples and married couples, it was generally common to baptize their children in the church in the 1980s and the 1990s, whether or not parents attributed great value to Christian faith and Christian practices. The tradition of infant baptism was intact. In the 2 first decades of the 21st century, Norway has increased its participation in the global market, both economically and socially. The global economy and the spreading of consumerism are intimately tied to the globalized media sphere. Local situated practices anchored in Christian tradition are challenged by consumers' logic, which are critically influenced by medialization, especially from popular culture. On the individual level, the consumer societies led people to demand beliefs and practices which can stimulate needs, feel enjoyment, and deal with strain and the cost of the market ethics. The emphasis on the personal and subjective path, the Norwegian Church, among other religious and worldviews organizations, responds to the changes and providing individual emotional experience to their members. The consumer logic stimulation of the individual subjectivity seems also to be confirmed with the strengthening of individual rights. The individual citizen has rights in an increasing number of areas that guaranteed through legislation. The Church of Norway got an opportunity to renew and expand Christian education in partnership with home, family, and parents. In 2003, the Parliament Stortinget founded a Christian education reform for children and young people affiliated to the church. The Storting argued that Norway was obliged to comply with international declarations and conventions on human rights, which stress that children have the right to spiritual development. The individual self-determination is directed towards the child's integrity and value. In the field of pedagogy, this concept has been expressed as the child's voice. The notion of the child's voice has gained prominence over time, particularly in international and national declaration of rights and legal texts. Sean Rodduck and Julia Flutter describe a long history of the children's rights movement. Norway, as part of this movement, addresses the child's participation rights in a variety of areas and situations. When it comes to parenting, the child's views change the condition for socializing between adults and children. In order to protect the child's integrity, the parents highlight the child's feeling, experiences, and points of view. The notion of the child's self-determination has gained prominence in the religious field as well, by emphasizing the child's spiritual voice. Successful value transmission is to promote a democratic parenting style that assists children to find their meaning in life. Parents who are following these principles make great efforts to discuss issues with their children, be open to the child's experiences, and support them in making their own value choices. The pedagogical ideal for the early development environment reflects the senses of modern society, organized primarily around the individual. The philosopher Charles Taylor is a spokesman for an ethics that is based on the ideals of modernity with a strong emphasis on individual identity. Throughout his philosophical work, Taylor promotes an image of a human being as a self-interpretive and self-reflective being. A human being creates his reality and identity and acts in the world according to a continuous quest for meaning. This can be understood as acting to realize oneself and to be true to oneself. Given our ability, and Taylor's philosophy provides perspectives for understanding the child as subject. Moreover, the child is a moral subject who is aware of his freedom of choice. Transferred to the parents who are members of the Church of Norway, the question of baptism might be answered in the framework of the child's moral ethics. So, in order to sum up how we can explain parents who are affiliated to the church and are baptized and still choose to opt out baptism for the children, the answer seems to be how cultural understandings intersect with socioeconomic structures and influence the generation's approach to socialization. The parents' preferences and views on religion and the religious secular competition in the framework of a consumer society, which a weaker relation to religious tradition. The parental generation has the features of the new religious regime with lower denominational identity and higher religious individualization. These worldview and religious environments have profound consequences for the traditional way to hand down to the next generation. The parents hesitate to adapt uncritical to religion and in particular to one single religious tradition. Therefore, the way they made the tradition of infant baptism a subject of assessment. The question of baptism provides self-reflections and a conscious position on religion and worldviews. In this respect, the child's right to decide for itself on the one hand, and the child's autonomy to express individuality on the other, serve as arguments for not baptizing the child. Furthermore, these two arguments are connected to and mutually strengthening the parents' choice to not baptize their children. Thank you.
Thank you, Ida-Marie. You really gave us a lot to think about by linking the choices of the parents so well to other changes and development in society, not just the ones that what you term the new religious regime and the rights of the child, but also even to political and economical changes. So it's a lot to think about, and I know a lot to discuss. I would now like to present Karen Marie Sø-Let-Nielsen, who works for the Center for Pastoral Education and Research in Church of Denmark, and is also a guest researcher at the University of Copenhagen. So please, Karen Marie.
Thank you very much, Steinar. I'd like to start with thanking the whole organizing committee of the project for inviting me. I'm really happy that I have the opportunity to speak to you today. Now I'll share my screen. I have some PowerPoint slides. Let's see. Is this working? Great, thank you. So, why should I baptize my child? That is the topic of today. The content of this presentation. How did we study the changes in baptism in Denmark? I'll just give you a brief overview of what we did, and then I'll take you through what are parents' reasons for opting in or out of baptism. And finally, I'll try to talk about what has changed. I'll try to use societal changes as some explanation of factors. How did we study the changes in baptism? The subject for two studies, the two that you're shown on the slide here, it was parents and the choice of baptism. That was our focus. And for the first one, dåb eller ej, baptism or not, in 2015, I did the study with sociologist of religion Astrid Krabbe-Trolle. We did a YouGov survey with 1,042 respondents, and then we made qualitative interviews, life history interviews with 27 parents in the area of Copenhagen. And then from 2018 to 2020, I did the study Dåb i dag, Baptism Today, together with Berit Weigand Berg, who's a theologian. And both studies were funded by research grants from Ministry of Church Affairs, Dåb i dag from Church Development Agency, and also the University of Copenhagen. And for this last, published in 2020, I did interviews with 25 parents in 5 different settings in Denmark, covering rural areas and smaller towns as well. Just a little theory. We used double air for secularization, trying to see whether we could see secularization at individual level as a low connection to the Christian meaning of baptism. And for looking for individualization, we used Taylor, Gittens, Healers, and Woodhead for opting out of baptism because the child should make own choice of religion. We looked for bricolage, religiosity, where you put together your own religious package. And we looked, was the choice of baptism rooted in the parents' own religious considerations? And was the opting out of baptism also connected to an authority critical approach to religion? That was what we looked for. So in the YouGov survey, we only asked parents who had chosen baptism for 1 or more children, why did you choose baptism for your child? Top 3 factors were, it's a tradition, it's a marking of the child's naming, it's part of being Danish. So these were the reasons, top 3 factors for choosing baptism for the child. And we also found that 37% of non-church members chose baptism for their child. We think that this might be, they might have a partner who's a member of the church, and that would be the background for such a large number of non-church members choosing baptism. Then we asked parents who opted out of baptism, why did you opt out of baptism for your child? And the top 3 factors here were, the child should make its own choice of religion. I can't say yes to the creed. The parent couldn't relate to the full, everything that's in the Christian creed. Or I have another religion. Those were the top 3 factors. And then no religion was also a very big factor. We also found that 9% of church members opted out of baptism for their child. So this was the survey. And what we could see from the parents who opted out of baptism and the parents in the interviews, the child should make its own choice of religion. So, trying to give you a view of what was going on in the interviews. In the interviews, what were the factors behind baptism or no baptism? The parents who chose baptism for the children, they talked about Christian values as important for their child. They connected the Christian values to Danish values. Some of the parents said, baptism is part of my values. This is what I stand for. Some parents said, baptism is Christianity. This is what you do as a Christian. So these were the reasons for choosing baptism for the children. They wanted the child to have certain values, collective values, or my values, or to be connected to Christianity. The parents who opted out of baptism for their children, they connected this no to baptism with no faith. They said, I'm not a believer. I can't baptize my child. Or they had a very strong faith. We had a mother, she defined herself as a believer. And as a believer, she was not able to give this big thing of faith to her child. He had to find out for himself what faith is, and she did not want to interfere with that by baptizing him. Strong feelings against religion was also, some parents said that they were really so much against religion that baptism was not an option. And then we had the parents who had a distance membership. Church was no longer meaningful in their lives, and therefore baptism was not relevant. We had, for instance, a mother of two. She'd grown up in a rural area in Denmark. She'd been in the church choir for many years, been to church every Sunday singing the hymns. When she was confirmed, she really felt that she meant it. And she actually, as she told us, she felt that she was a bit better than us, than the other ones, because she felt this very strong, that she wanted to be confirmed. And then she moved to the big city for education, and she married a partner who was very strongly against religion. And then when they got their first child, they were negotiating about baptism, and he felt very strongly against baptism. And she was like, yeah, it's not that relevant anymore. And then the child was not baptized. So I'd like to try and share some interpretation of the interviews in light of societal changes. With Taylor, we can say that parents today are set in a cross pressure. They're responsible for creating their own meaning of life. We all are, and the parents too. There's a demand for authenticity. When you choose something, you must really mean it. You have to, stand for your choices. And in some families, in some couples, if the child has two parents, this leads to a negotiation between the parents, as the example I told you before, where the strongest feelings win. Or in other instances, the parents enter a mutual room of reflection on the baptism, where they reflect on how are we connected to the church and to the faith. How does the church relate to the family that we are building now? Is it part of our lives and our stories? So we saw negotiation, we saw mutual rooms of reflection between the partners. And the negotiations or the reflections, what determined the final choice of baptism or no baptism? The negotiations between the parents were, this was where the final choices were made, but contributing factors were whether church was part of the parents' mental backdrop. Did they grow up with church? Did they grow up in a context where the local church was part of, school, family parties, and so on? Their own childhood and traditions contributed a lot. They looked to siblings and friends' practice of baptism or no baptism, but it was not like, it was just a contributing factor. It was not determining, but it was there in some cases. And then also the interviews, as they are distributed in all over Denmark in a range of contexts, we could see that if you live in the metropole, in Copenhagen area, then you have a larger range of choices for celebrating the birth of your child. So if you live in Copenhagen or the metropolitan area, it's more likely that you've heard about or maybe attended a naming ceremony or other kinds of celebrations. If you're in a rural area, it was baptism or no baptism and no party then. So some parents, they chose baptism because they wanted to celebrate their child, but they did not connect it to faith. I've connected Grace Davey and Per Pedersen's thoughts on the shifts, the long-term shifts in the association affiliation to the national churches. And I'm trying to suggest a concept of churching alone, whether we see a trend of churching alone. And with churching alone, I mean a way of connecting to the church where the relationship to the church should be about meaning in my life. It should make meaning for me as an individual. It should be about storytelling and fitting into the way I tell the story of my life. It's a choice, and you could call it short-term consumption, where you connect to the church whenever it makes sense for you. On the other hand, of course, in Denmark, we have a lot of what you then could call churching together, which is about the tradition, about connecting to the family history, about doing your duties, fulfilling your obligations, and more about a long-term commitment. And we saw both things in the interviews. Baptism, in many cases, it's for many parents, it is a way of continuing your bonds with your family and connection to the older generations. It's also a way of marking a change, because now they, as parents, take on a new role in creating a family of their own, and they show the family and of both sides. They show the families that, yeah, okay, you had two different traditions here. Now we are making our own. So it's both a continuation and a change. The choice of baptism can also mark a rejection of grandparents' non-religious values. Some of these parents, they had parents from the generation of 68, and they were raised with no religion at all. We had one mother who was raised with what she called nihilistic values, and she thought that was just too cold, too meaningless. So she really wanted to connect her children to the church because she wanted them to have good God's love in their life and to have values instead of no values. So concluding from our interviews, parents consume baptism as a way of connecting to the meaning of life. Everybody, both the parents who chose baptism and those who opted out of baptism, they agree that the individual, child and adult should decide for him and herself. Infant baptism is only preliminary. The final choice is the child's own choice. We would also see that the parents put together their own folk church package, as well as their own tradition package. Tradition is not tradition. Tradition is, yeah, we pick some from your side, some from my side, and then we also saw something on Facebook, and our friends did another thing. This, we put together our own tradition package. And choice of baptism. Of course, it can be about faith, but we also saw that it was a way of building social capital, networks. It was a way of connecting to a larger community. It could be, you know, the collective identity of being Danish or being Christian. It could also be connecting to the local community if you were new. It was a way of connecting to a feeling of protection, a point of access to the local church community and also to the services of the church. And the parents, they found no real alternative to baptism. And I think this is where the Danish context really is different from, for instance, the Norwegian context that we just heard about. That, yes, we see falling baptism numbers, but not in the way that we do in other Nordic countries. There is, if you want to celebrate your child in Denmark, there's no real alternative to baptism as yet. Might come. So, just lastly, I'd like to say, what are the consequences for the relationship between the church and the people? I think if we look here in the past, the folk church was the one to be active, defining the relationship between the church and the people. And the people was passive, just, you know, taking part when the church made it possible. Today, the folk church has become passive, and the people are the active ones, actively choosing whether they want to be part of the church or not. And the people are less a collective identity and more of an I. Of course, this is just a tendency. This is not what it is for everybody. I'm just pointing out some tendencies that I've seen in our material. So, thank you very much for listening. This was my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Karen Marie. This was very illuminating, very well presented, and full of interesting input into why people baptize and why they don't. I know we will have a lot to discuss later on, but now we will first have a response from Hanna Salomäki. Hanna was originally a member of our core group in this project, but then had to leave, and we're glad to have her here with us today. So Hanna, please.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation for this webinar. And Jonas, if you open my PowerPoint there. And thank you for your interesting and stimulating presentations. In fact, I can see a lot of similar findings in Finnish context too. And I would like to continue sharing, in fact, two findings in recent Finnish research. My first point has a lot of to do with these previous presentations. A turning point in cultural Christianity is also challenging the church occasional offices. As we know, the Nordic church relationship has often been described as permanent and stable. Church membership has been maintained regardless of the role of the church plays in one's personal life. The church occasional offices are taken for granted. But as we heard, younger generations' relationship with the church is no longer so straightforward. Many now making decisions about baptism belong to the millennial generation, so they are about 30, 40 years old. This age cohort's commitment to the church and its traditions differs considerably from that of previous generations, as we already heard. The resignation of young adults from the church in Finland increasingly ascribed to the fact that the church as an institution has no meaning for me. This interpretation model is confirmed when we examine the reasoning behind not getting a child baptized. If one's relationship with the church is distant, there is no motive to associate one's child with the church either. If there is no relationship with the church in daily life, the church is not needed when significant life events are celebrated. Women especially emphasize that if their relationship with the church is distant, there is no reason to have their own child baptized. But we can also see changing attitudes towards other church rites. Christian funerals are still very popular, but in fact, if we are looking at these millennia, there are more those who don't want Christian funerals for themselves when the day comes someday than those who want it. So there's also change in this case. In the Finnish context, we have interpreted the ongoing change as a turning point for cultural Christianity. The traditional Nordic commitment to the church is breaking down, and traditional folk-based religiosity and customs are being replaced by the conscious choice, just as we already heard. So this is a question of individual choice and also individual choice of the child, and also question of authenticity. And then my second point, if you change the, yes, yeah, is that women's declining religiosity is changing how baptism is performed. In the Finnish context, the question of gender also arises. Some recent surveys have revealed surprising new result when the religiosity of women and men is compared. For several years, concern has been expressed in Finnish Lutheran Church about young men, how they do not participate in religious activities, how they resign from the church, and how they do not believe in God. But the women are those who are very active. However, in recent studies, the situation has changed. Young women are strikingly critical of religion, while the youngest group of men is showing an increase in religiosity. Compared with other European countries, exceptionally few young Finnish women define themselves as religious at all. Young women's more critical attitude to religion is also reflected in their attitude to baptism. When we examined respondents under the age of 30, it proved that surprisingly great number of men attached importance to a religious celebration. In all other age cohorts, more women than men considered it important to have a religious ritual to mark the birth of the child. Women under 30 years were also the least likely of all respondents to teach their child to pray. There has been a discussion of the break of the chain of memory in the sociology of religion, in fact, quite many years. That means parents are consciously choosing not to hand on religious tradition to their own children. And it seems this happens especially among the young women in Finland. So far, women have played a significant role in the transmission of religious tradition. Both mothers and grandmothers have been important religious influencers. However, increased religious activity, for example, in religious practice, can be observed among young men. This prompts an interesting question. Is this also sign of change in roles in terms of the transmission of traditions? Do fathers come somehow in new ways in our families? And my last question is, will men assume a stronger role in religious education at homes in the future? Thank you.
Steinon, you should unmute your microphone.
Sorry, I thought I had unmuted it, but you didn't miss anything. I never say anything of consequence anyway. I think we have all been given lots of food for thought by the two presentations and the response. I mean, it's in all of them we saw how tradition is being replaced by individual conscious choice, and how baptism is perhaps more seen as a religious ritual than a tradition. And I think also, again, with the women and men in Finland, last time we also heard that people make the choices quite early. That was results from Finnish presentation. It's a lot of things to work on, and we will have the breakout groups now for 20 minutes. And I'm going to give you the two questions. What did you especially notice in the presentations? And does this resonate with your own experience? So we are asking people to reflect on the presentations, both, things that they found noteworthy and the context, if they see it reflected in their own context. I'm going to point out what you can do after the breakout groups if you have results that you want to put into the ongoing project of baptism in changing churches. The groups can send questions to speakers during plenary sessions, so you can ask someone to do that, or individuals can send questions to speakers during plenary sessions, that is after the breakout groups. The groups can also send their observations to the project by email, and the group leaders already have that email, and they've been asked to send some information from the group discussions. And individuals are also welcome to send, of course, questions and send their observations to UNAS and to Churches in Times of Change project. So these are the options after the discussion. And now I think it's time to go to the breakout groups. Mäki to join us in the response. So Jonas, do we have any questions by now?
No, I have not received any questions. Please use the chat function to comment and ask questions or indicate if you want to ask your question directly. You're also welcome to do that.
Mm-hmm. Can I then ask
there's some
Hanna?
questions here now.
Oh, there is a question.
First, there's a question from Bio Nygaard. Are trends presented for larger urban settings only? What is the delay for rural or provincial areas? I think that's a question which we could ask Karen Marie, but also maybe Ida Marie wants to say something.
Thank you. The two studies in Denmark, the first was Dobelej, sorry, that was in the metropolitan context, but the other one from published 2020, it was also rural areas and smaller cities. So, and the individualization is everywhere. People are reflecting. The biggest difference between rural areas and the metropolitan area is that the range of choices is smaller. If you're in the rural area, it's baptism or not. in Copenhagen, you can also make your own naming. So I think that's.
Thank you. Then there's a couple of questions, one from Maria Nogenmyr and Dennis Jelstrup, touching on the same question, namely the difference between gender in the Finnish context. And Hannah, so this question is for you. Do you have any theoretical view on why do you see a decrease in religiosity among young women while you detect the opposite among young men? And Dennis asked the same question, adding, is it a Christian religiosity you see, or is it other types of religiosity you see increasing among men? Hannah, do you want to respond to that question?
Yes. We have been thinking maybe one reason why young women are so critical is that because for them issues of equality, human rights and justice, minorities seem to be more important than they are for men at the same age. And that's maybe some kind of idea that they feel that the church does not present these values which are important for them. So that's why they are so critical toward the church or institutional religion. This might be one reason. And also, at least in Finland, we can see that young men are quite interested in that kind of parties, in political parties which very much talk about traditional values in different ways. And somehow this is something young men are interested in. And maybe they, in that sense, feel that church, even if they are not so active themselves, somehow church means for them traditions which are important for these young age groups. But we don't know so exactly, because we have just got a number of new surveys, and we are now doing the work to find out what is the story here behind these attitudes. Then there was another question. Was it another question?
It was touching upon the Finnish men who have a higher religiosity than women. Is it a Christian religion we're talking about, or is it other types of religiosity that you're talking about?
Yes, interestingly, it's both of them. We can see them more active in participating. They are also now believing more than earlier, but they are also somehow finding this alternative spirituality. So they believe in really different kind of things at the same time. And somehow this is very surprisingly for us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let me continue with some questions which have to do with values. It is a question from Christian Afman on Danish values and the choice of baptism. And I think that if the question is meant for Karen Marie, but I would say that the same question could go to Ida Marie. So I would like both of you to respond to this. The question is, what is the connection between national values, Danish or Norwegian values, and the choice of baptism? Could you elaborate a bit on that? And I think I will give the word first to Ida Marie, and then to Karen Marie.
I was not astonished by the results from Denmark combining the Danish values and the Christian values. I was curious about if we could address the same questions in Norway, and I don't. My answer is not, because I do not think that Norwegian could consider themselves having both having Christian values or Norwegian values, because we are not operating with Norwegian values as you are in Denmark, talking of Danish values. For some years ago, I visited Copenhagen, and the political right-wing party. What is the name? What is the name?
Dansk Folkeparti.
Dansk Folkeparti. They had on the board, it was an announcement on the board, and they said, we are supporting the Danish values. We're not, that could never, Fremskrittspartiet, the political right-wing party in Norway, could never address this combination between being representative for something very Norwegian and connected to the Norwegian values. So, but what we can see is that there is in Norway also a strong connection between being a member of the church and support what the church is doing, and also considering themselves that this is something not being a Norwegian, but something typical Norwegian. You see, so they're not linking to the specific values, but a sort of being Norwegian. But could I have some questions to Maria.
Right, then we will ask Karen Marie directly. We will ask Karen Marie directly then about the connection between Danish values and baptism. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Thank you. I think it's a very interesting question. And I think it has a lot to do with, I won't say special Danishness, but we have some strong collective identities in Denmark. The Danish nation, the church, going to work, family, friends, the sports club, something like that. And the parents that in the interviews, when they said that baptism was part of being Danish, a lot of them emphasized, don't think that I'm Danish Folkeparti. I'm not. I just think that the Danish values are the same as the Christian values, that you should treat others in the same way you want them to treat you. And so I think underlying, we find some collective values that many Danes still hold for almost universal. And I think these underlying values, some see them as Danish, some see them as Christian, but in fact, it's more like, we have this common, this social capital, this high level of confidence we have in each other in Denmark. I think this is where it's linked. So being baptized means that you opt into the Danish family, you do what Danes do, and you go to confirmations and weddings and funerals in the Danish way. So I think this is all interconnected. And I think actually that the Danish Folkeparti, the right-wing party, I think they have muddled this picture and actually harmed the connection between the church and the state a bit, but not irreparably.
Thank you. And Ida Marie, you hinted that you had some questions as well. Do you want to ask your question?
Yes, please. I would like to I was a bit curious about the group of parents who have opted out of baptism for their child, and the top 3 factors that you, Karen Marie, mentioned. That the child should make its own choice of religion. I can't say yes to the creed, and I have another religion. I'm wondering, do they, or did you ask the question if they, if the parents could consider themselves as Christian, and how is this related to the group who have opted out and the group who have opted in?
Thank you. I'll just, now I didn't put in all the numbers in my presentation, but I have them right here. You asked me if they considered themselves to be Christians.
Yeah. Do the parents who opted baptism tend to consider them as Christians? And what about the other group?
I can't remember if we asked directly in the survey, but in the interviews, some of the parents who opted out of baptism actually considered themselves to be Christian, but they couldn't take the choice of baptism for their child. Mm-hmm. I can come back with the results for the survey. We can email on that, but we didn't ask that. But it was clear that I have another religion or no religion. They were big.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Then I have a number of other comments and questions. Henrik Bundgaard has sent a comment. Henrik, do you want to comment directly? Please unmute yourself and give your comment.
Yes. It was something from Karen Marie's presentation where she talked about it's very important for young parents today to have authenticity. They long for authenticity, and therefore when they choose baptism for their children, it must mean something for them. It must connect them to a meaningful life. And I wonder, are we in the churches good enough to communicate this meaningfulness of the baptism to young people today? And if we not are, how could we do this communication of the meaningfulness of baptism in a better way?
Yes, who wants to respond to that? Ida Marie or Karen Marie?
I'd love to.
Please.
Thank you. I think that when we, in the interviews, I think when we talk about being connected to religion, we can talk about the religion as knowing something. You know, you can go to the church for answers. You can go to, religion can be knowing, and then you can go to the church for answers. It can also be being, then you go to the church to do specific things, and it can also be doing. Sorry, I'm messing this up. What I want to say is that parents today, they don't want answers from the church. They are not interested in theologians or pastors telling them what to think about baptism. And I think that the conversation that all pastors have with the parents before the actual baptism, I think that is a perfect platform for an existential conversation. I think priests, pastors, theologians, we have to rehearse, we have to find out what has actually been the meaning of my baptism in my life. Why has it done any difference at all in my life that I was baptized? And I think that's the story we have to tell, because this demand for authenticity, it's not just the parents who live with that. We all do. And they want to meet a real person in the church or in their home or wherever this conversation takes place. And I think that we have to help the parents to feel connected to the meaning of baptism. Otherwise, they will not feel that it makes meaning to them or makes sense to them. So I think that's one thing. And then I don't know if this is the situation in the other Nordic countries, but in Denmark we have this. We just found out that 6,700 less children were baptized in 2020 than in 2019. So we actually have maybe 20% less baptisms in 2020. And this is a burning platform and a great opportunity for all pastors to connect to all these parents. We can write or call or visit the parents who are members of the church and who has an unbaptized child and offer them an important conversation. But if we go to them and just give them automatic answers from the book of dogmatics, we can forget everything about it. We have to be there as persons. So actually we are back to square one. We are back to Christianity being given from one person to another. And you know, back then, the apostles, it didn't make sense if they couldn't tell people what a difference it made in their lives. So I think that's where we are heading. I think that's our chance, and a burning platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Ida Marie, do you want to comment this question or comment on authenticity and choice of baptism?
As I said, very often we are connecting authenticity to being true with yourself and develop an identity which you could argue for and explain based on the choices you make. But I think that Karin Maria said several very interesting things considering authenticity, and it shouldn't be that hard for the church to argue that feeling a strong connection to the church, to the tradition the church represents, or feeling that the church, that infant baptism could protect the child. It makes a difference between being not baptized and being baptized, and also that coming from a family where infant baptism is a family tradition, these three way of addressing or approaching infant baptism could be a way to give the parents some arguments or frame their thoughts about in baptism. It's not always like keeping the authenticity that it has to be when you are 15 or 14 or 15 years and considering confirmation. It also could be for the child up to that age and up to that decision. So yes, I think that's actually how to naming what it means to be true to oneself. That could also be a theological. That should be a theological important issue, which could be where it should where theologian had something to respond to and argue for that religion. And if I should sum up what I'm trying to say, it could be that religion is a resource for the child to better consider their worldview questions or their worldview stance through the childhood and also when they are young people.
Thank you. In continuation of this, there's a comment or a question from Jonas Bodin in Vallentuna Forsamling. Do you want to ask your comment or question?
I think it's a very interesting seminar. I'm very pleased with being a part of it. But in the small group also I raised the question of where can young people, now I say between 20 and 65 years old, find a community feeling in the parish. My experience is if you don't have children, you don't like to sing, then you're not involved in church groups. So the folk church idea is failing today. There's no community or no groups for the majority of people. So maybe this is the reason of no baptism. The church is not my community. So I don't have the structures of plausibility. So I don't have the meaning creation of meaning around the baptism, around the faith. So maybe this is, please, Karen, maybe you can say something about it.
Thank you very much, Karen Marie. Lack of plausibility and church not being your community or feeling distant from the church, is that a major reason for not being baptized or having your children baptized?
I think it's a very, very important question, and I think a lot of this is about the image or the perception that people have of the church. And as you say, Jonas Bodin, if you're not out for baptism or confirmation, then what do I need the church for? And then it's good. And then the church relationship will be attending others' parties or what you see in the newspapers. And if you see official pictures of the church, then you only see white people. You see happy families. You see no divorces, no sickness. You see, because the old people, we hide them away in the church hall. We never put them in the media. In the media, you see this mainstream image, and everybody thinks, okay, then the church wants people, if you're a happy family, then you can come here and have your child baptized, but otherwise you can't. I think the visual side of this is very important. And in Denmark, we have a specific problem with reaching out to Christians of non-Western or non-Danish ethnicity. The Danish folk church, it's Danish language, it's white skin. It's not that we have decided it to be that way. It's just how it is. And I think we really have to broaden our perspective. We have to be more inclusive on rainbow families. You use that term too. Same-sex couples and divorced, lone parents. It shouldn't be a success parameter to go to the church and have a wedding or a baptism. So I'm just trying to provoke you a bit. But I think you are onto something, Jonas, that the church could be much broader and much more reaching out to the diversity and in our communities. In Denmark, I think we have 10% now with non-Danish ethnicity. Why is this not reflected in the church? I think we have to ask ourselves that.
And also to add to that, then if you have a picture from the church, from inside the church, then it's not just white skin, it's also white hair.
So a generational question. Thank you. And I could add to what Karen Marie says, actually 22% of the mothers today in Denmark are of non-Danish background. So it's quite substantial if you are thinking about parenthood and parents choosing for baptism.
22%, yes, but that doesn't mean they're not Christian. They might be.
No, but they might not pay the same attention to Danish tradition and values as a motivation for baptism. Then Olafur Jon Magnusson has a question to Hannah Salomäki. And I hope you're still with us, Hannah. We cannot see your video, but
yes, yeah.
Olafur, please, could you unmute yourself? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to thank you, Ida-Marie, Karen Marie, and Hanna, very much for your input. It was very thought-provoking. But I have a question for Hanna, excuse me. Is there some evidence that certain fathers who are becoming more active in Christian upbringing, that they are doing this as a fearful reaction to a perceived diminishing influence of males in society?
Yes, I think we don't have yet any evidence what they are in fact doing. We just know something about their attitudes, but we don't know yet if they are really doing something more at their house. Maybe next year we will tell us about that.
Thank you. So more evidence is needed. Then there's a question from Bjorn Nygaard, which is more general and I think pointed or could be asked to any of the presenters. He writes, given the presented trends, have we come to a stage where we need to deliberately work out a range of initiation options that allow for parents or children to attach to faith or church in a variety of ways at various stages in childhood or adult life? And I don't know, Bivo, if you want to add something to this. And Karen Marie and Ida Marie, do you think that would it be wise to have a variety of options for becoming part of the church, not just baptism?
I'd be happy to go first, but I'm sure you also have some views on this, Ida Marie. I think doing that, it would be, both Ida Marie and I, we have used marketization theories in our works and our studies, and I think what has been done from the state of the Church of Denmark has been the church has been very good at in fact marketizing, initiating a lot of new target group oriented activities like baby hymn singing, and mini confirmation for third graders, and we have hunters services, and every group can have their own service. So I think actually that the church is trying to do that, not with the rituals, but in any other aspect of the church life. And I think that I'm not sure that it's the right way to go. I think if the rituals were made more inclusive, because I think that splitting up even more is not what we need in this already very, everything is exploding out in small fractions. So I think that making the rituals more inclusive could be a way to go. And I know that we have this this organization called Religion and Faith and Folk Church and Religious Dialogue, I think it's called, Folkekirke og Religionsmøde. And I think they've made a very valuable work with talking to people when what do couples do if they are of this different faiths? How can they celebrate the birth of their child? And I think things like that, making it possible to have a ritual even if you have two different faiths in the family, I think that could be a way to approach. Ida Marie, what do you think? What's going on in Norway?
This is, of course, a theological questions, but considering the situation today, the kind of church offerings and, for example, confirmation and baby hymn singing groups and other popular offerings from the church, it seems to be quite inclusive. And I think that the reason for that, people who are not affiliated to the church, parents who are not affiliated to the church, young people who are not baptized and still want to take part in a confirmation class, is that the church still have this majority status. We have not taken into account that the numbers are dropping. People know that the numbers are dropping, that the figures are not the same as it was for decades ago, but still we have the people have the image of the churches. The church has opened doors, so they don't ask if you are affiliated or not. I asked some and this is I think the way of framing it is that this is the church is the part of the welfare state, and it shouldn't cost anything to participate, and all Norwegian has the ticket to the church. I asked some parents who wanted to take part in the baby hymn singing groups. Why are they? You don't feel that this is something for you? You don't want to baptize your child, and you are not baptized yourself. And they said, no, it had nothing to do with that. It's for every parents, and it's for everyone. So maybe I taking my mouth too full, but I think it's strong reasons to conclude that in many ways the church has success in being inclusive.
Thank you very much. As you know, this is a comparative Nordic study between folk churches. But do we know anything about other churches or other church traditions and changes in baptism when it comes to parents' view on baptism? Do you, Karen Marie or Ida Marie, do you know anything about Catholic Church or other church traditions and changes in view? Do we have any research on that? Would it correspond to what we see in our Nordic folk churches, or would it be a different pattern?
Yeah, we collaborated with the Church of England some years ago, and you know that their baptism percentage is down to, I think, less than 10%. And of course, they have a completely different membership structure, where in the Nordic countries, you're baptized as a small child, and if you don't want to be a member, you should actively opt out. And in Britain, it's just the opposite way around. You're not a member just by being baptized. You become a member by going to church and taking communion and being on the roll and so on. So it's a very different situation. I think actually it's really hard to compare the Nordic the churches in the Nordic countries to. We are really exceptional, and even though our numbers of attendance and affiliation are dropping, they are, you know, sky high compared to, for instance, Germany, where they're really suffering.
Thank you. And Ida Marie, do you know about other church traditions?
In the Catholic Church in Norway, the Catholic Church in Norway is mainly a migration church. The ethnic Norwegian group is shrinking, and more of the members are from other countries, particularly the Baltic states and Asia and Africa. Not so much any longer from Latin America. And as far as I know, the same tendency you see in the Catholic Church in Norway, even it is a migrant church, that is not obvious any longer that being a Catholic is to opt for baptism for your child.
Thank you.
Yes.
And maybe I can.
Time is running very quickly, so I will.
It's just about the other denominations in Denmark. The Baptists and the Catholics and Methodist churches, they see the same pattern of dropping numbers here. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. So that could be a broader cultural pattern, maybe.
Yeah.
Time is running very quickly. I have more comments and questions in the chat, but we do not have time for more questions. So I will give the word back to Steinun now, please.
Yes, thank you. As you know, this is a joint Nordic project, and I would like to invite the other researchers on the group that are there, if they would like to comment also on the discussion today and the presentations. And those are Karin Tilberg, Harald Hedstad, and Jiri Komulainen. Perhaps Karin, you might like to start.
Yes, I just want to say briefly, because we run out of time. It's been very interesting to listen to you all. Thank you so much to the contributors, but also thank you to all of you who participate. It's really fruitful to listen to your comments. We had a great discussion. As usual, I allow myself to say now, the second time around, in the smaller group, and it's surprising how similar, even though you, as you say, Karen Marie, how different we are to other European churches, we are so similar to each other, which makes this project so meaningful, because there are so many similar challenges. So that's really interesting.
Thank you. And Jiri Kommelainen from Finland.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for everyone for this very interesting afternoon. And in our Finnish-speaking group there, we were wondering that on the one hand, we have a problem that, or challenge, if you like, that not all our members are bringing their children to be baptized, even though the Lutheran Church is a child baptizing church. But on the other hand, at the same time, in Finland at least, some of us had experienced, there are even parents who are not anymore, or maybe ever, have been belonging to the Finnish Lutheran Church, but still they wish to have a child baptized, but our structures and our theology is not admitting it. And so we have also a question in a different form, what to do with those parents who are not belonging to the church, but they wish, could you please baptize our children? But at least in Finland, it's not possible according to our law and also our church structure. And so maybe we should tackle this issue also. Thank you.
Thank you. That's definitely a topic for future discussion. I would now like to invite Harald Hegstad, who is the chair of this group, to give us some concluding words.
Thank you very much for good introductions and a good discussion. What I learned from, among other things, from the introductions was that there are huge trends going on in society in general, and when it comes to religion. And some of those trends are out of the reach of the church. They are happening anyway, but we have to understand them and to take them into account. And I think there are a lot of things that we do as a church that was good years ago, but it's not working now. So in a way, we need to reinvent ourselves, and the question of baptism is just a symptom of that. Our next webinar after Easter will be on the question whether churches should introduce rituals to bless children when parents do not want to baptize them. And that's a question that is both theological and practical, and that addresses this new situation. To be a church today, we need to redefine ourselves and also redefine our practices. But how do we do that and still be Lutheran churches? So thank you for today, and welcome back for new questions and discussions.
Yeah. I would like to thank all those who contributed today. Of course, especially big thanks to our presenters, Ida-Mari Höök, Kari-Mari Sölet-Nielsen, and Hanna Salomäki, and everyone who participated. This has been a very enthusiastic crowd, and sadly we couldn't discuss all the questions, but we did definitely have quite a lot of things to continue with in our further discussions. I just want to say the next webinar is on April 7th, again from 13 to 15 Central European time, Icelanders. That's from 11 to 1 o'clock, I think, our time, because the clock has changed. And the topic then is bless, not baptize. So we will be discussing alternatives to baptism. And so I would like to thank you, everyone, for being here, and see you next time on April the 7th.
Bye-bye.